The moving truck pulled away from our new driveway as I stood surveying our fresh start. Sunshine dappled the immaculate streets of Oak Ridge Estates through ancient oak trees that lined each block. After 15 years in cramped city apartments, this suburban paradise felt almost unreal in its perfection. Identical mailboxes stood at attention before each home. Pristine lawns stretched in every direction without a dandelion in sight. Emma bounded up beside me, her blonde ponytail bouncing with each step. Her eyes sparkled with excitement behind her glasses as she tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, can I go explore the neighborhood? I saw a playground down the street." I knelt down to her level, checking the continuous glucose monitor attached to her arm. "Blood sugar looks good, but keep your phone and emergency kit with you at all times," I reminded her. "And be back in 30 minutes for your next check." Emma rolled her eyes with the practiced exasperation only an 11-year-old could master. "I know, Dad. I have been managing diabetes since I was 5, remember?" She patted the small medical pouch strapped to her waist containing glucose tablets, insulin, and a juice box. I watched her skip down the sidewalk, my heart swelling with pride and that ever-present worry that comes with parenting a child with a chronic medical condition. Type 1 diabetes had been our constant companion since her diagnosis 6 years ago. Despite the challenges, Emma never complained about the finger pricks, insulin injections, or constant monitoring. She handled everything with remarkable maturity for someone so young. Back inside, I unpacked my home office boxes. My FBI credentials and case files from the Civil Rights Division remained sealed in the bottom drawer of my desk. After years investigating housing discrimination and civil rights violations, I had requested a transfer to this quiet suburban office for Emma's sake. A more predictable schedule, better schools, and a supposedly family-friendly community seemed worth the career adjustment. Our first week passed in a blur of unpacking and meeting neighbors. Most seemed friendly enough, bringing welcome baskets and invitations to barbecues. Several mentioned the strict homeowners association with a mixture of eye rolls and warnings. "Keep your trash cans out of sight," one neighbor advised. "And never, ever plant unapproved flowers," another added with a nervous laugh. The following Saturday brought my first encounter with the infamous HOA. The community center filled with residents for the monthly meeting. I took a seat near the back, observing rather than participating, an old habit from my investigative days. Then she entered. The room fell silent as Vivian Richardson, Karen, as I would later hear neighbors secretly call her, strode to the podium. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in an immaculate bob. Designer clothes draped her thin frame, and diamond jewelry caught the light as she arranged her papers. Something about her demeanor immediately set off my professional alarms. The way other board members deferred to her, how residents seemed to physically shrink in her presence. "Welcome to the August HOA meeting," she announced, her voice crisp and commanding. "Before we begin, I would like to address several rule violations that have been noted this month." She proceeded to list infractions with almost religious fervor, naming specific homeowners who had committed such sins as leaving garbage cans visible for more than 12 hours or installing unauthorized bird feeders. As she spoke, I noticed how she seemed to relish the discomfort of those she called out. Her smile never reached her cold blue eyes. When someone attempted to explain their situation, she cut them off with practiced efficiency. "The rules exist for a reason," she repeated like a mantra. "Without strict enforcement, property values suffer." The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, dominated by her voice and agenda. Walking home that evening, I could not shake an uneasy feeling. Something about Vivian Richardson reminded me of other authority figures I had investigated, individuals who weaponized rules to exert control rather than build community. But surely I was overreacting. This was just a suburban HOA president taking her volunteer position too seriously, not a civil rights case. Little did I know this woman would soon become both my worst nightmare and my most significant professional challenge. Life fell into a predictable routine during our first month in Oak Ridge Estates. Each morning began with checking Emma's glucose levels and adjusting her insulin. Her medical management was a complex dance of numbers, timing, and careful monitoring. Low blood sugar could trigger dangerous hypoglycemia within minutes, confusion, seizures, even unconsciousness. High blood sugar posed different but equally serious long-term risks. Every parent of a diabetic child lives with this constant vigilance. Emma adapted well to her new school, making friends quickly with her outgoing personality. She joined the science club and brought home excellent grades. But diabetes management at school presented unique challenges. During physical education or unexpected schedule changes, her blood sugar could drop dangerously low, requiring immediate sugar intervention. I stocked emergency supplies everywhere, glucose tablets in her backpack, juice boxes in her locker, and candy in her teacher's desk. We developed a system with the school nurse for monitoring her condition. Emma wore her continuous glucose monitor faithfully, which sent alerts to both our phones when her levels approached dangerous thresholds. The first confrontation with Vivian Richardson occurred 3 weeks after we moved in. I was planting flowers in our front garden when her shadow fell across the soil. Looking up, I found her standing on our walkway, clipboard in hand, expression severe. "Mr. Mitchell," she said without introducing herself, though I recognized her from the HOA meeting. "I notice you have installed unapproved vegetation in your front landscape bed." I stood brushing dirt from my hands. "These are just some perennials. My daughter and I planted them this morning." Her smile remained frozen as she pointed to her clipboard. According to HOA Regulation 17.3, all landscape modifications require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. These particular flowers are not on our approved plant list. I glanced at the cheerful yellow marigolds, unable to comprehend how such innocent plants could violate any reasonable policy. "They are just standard marigolds. They will help attract pollinators." "Pollinators bring bees, which pose a liability risk," she countered smoothly. "You will need to remove them by tomorrow and replace them with approved vegetation from this list." She handed me a 2-page document with military precision. "Or what?" I asked, immediately regretting my confrontational tone. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Or the association will issue a formal violation notice followed by daily fines until compliance is achieved." She turned to leave, then paused. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates, Mr. Mitchell. I do hope you and your daughter will make an effort to integrate properly into our community." That interaction marked the beginning of what became clear harassment. Over the next several weeks, our mailbox filled with violation notices for increasingly trivial issues. A garden hose not properly coiled, a garbage can visible for 15 minutes past the permitted time, Emma's bicycle left on the front porch overnight. Each notice carried Vivian's signature and a reminder of potential financial penalties. Neighbors began whispering warnings during casual conversations. "She targets newcomers," explained Monica, an elderly widow from across the street. "Tests to see if you will push back or fall in line." She made the Peterson family repaint their entire house 3 times because the shade of beige was supposedly off by a fraction. Meanwhile, Emma discovered the community clubhouse and its soda machine. On a particularly active day when her blood sugar dropped suddenly, she had rushed there for emergency sugar. The elderly attendant, Mr. Wilson, had helped her access the machine when she was short on change. That nice man said I could use the machine whenever I have an emergency, Emma explained over dinner one evening. He even gave me a special key to the side door since the main entrance sometimes locks automatically. I felt grateful for Mr. Wilson's understanding of Emma's medical needs, but my investigator instincts sensed potential conflict. That is very kind of him, but we should probably get official permission from the HOA board. Emma nodded, sipping her juice. I told him about my diabetes. He said his grandson has it too, so he understands how important quick sugar access is. The following week, a new laminated sign appeared on the clubhouse door. No unsupervised children ALLOWED. Violators will be removed from premises. Below this, in smaller print, by order of HOA Management V. Richardson, President. When I inquired about this policy change at the next HOA meeting, Vivian cited liability concerns and facility misuse. Although she never specifically mentioned Emma, her eyes flicked toward my daughter as she spoke about certain individuals abusing clubhouse privileges. That evening, Mr. Wilson called to apologize. She threatened my job, he explained, his voice heavy with regret. Said diabetic emergencies should be handled at home, not in communal facilities. I fought her on it, but the board backed her decision. I hung up feeling a familiar cold anger building, the same feeling that had driven me to the FBI's Civil Rights Division years ago. Power being wielded arbitrarily against vulnerable individuals was something I had dedicated my career to fighting. But now, it was happening to my own child, in our own neighborhood, under the guise of rule enforcement. The difference was that Vivian Richardson had no idea who she was actually dealing with, or what lines she was about to cross. July brought sweltering heat to Oak Ridge Estates. The community pool became the neighborhood hub as temperatures climbed past 90 degrees. Emma spent afternoons swimming with new friends while I worked nearby under an umbrella, keeping a watchful eye on her glucose monitor readings. Physical activity in hot weather could cause her blood sugar to drop rapidly, a dangerous combination requiring constant vigilance. That fateful Saturday began like any other summer day. Emma and 3 friends played Marco Polo in the shallow end while parents chatted nearby. My phone buzzed with a work email, distracting me momentarily. When I looked up again, Emma was climbing out of the pool, checking her continuous glucose monitor with a concerned expression. She approached me, water dripping from her swimsuit. "Dad, my reading is dropping really fast. I think I need sugar now." The monitor showed her glucose level at 70 mg/dl and falling rapidly, approaching the dangerous hypoglycemic range. I reached for her diabetes kit, only to realize we had used the last juice box earlier. "We need to get you something sugary immediately," I said, already calculating the fastest solution. The clubhouse with its soda machine stood just 50 yards away. "I can run over and grab a Sprite," Emma suggested, clearly recognizing the urgency. "It will be faster than packing everything up." Against my better judgment, I handed her a few dollars. "Be quick. Text me when you get there." She nodded, already jogging toward the clubhouse, her wet footprints marking the concrete path. I began gathering our belongings to follow her when my phone buzzed again, this time with an urgent glucose alert. Emma's levels had dropped to 58 mg/dl, dangerously low. Hypoglycemia at this level could trigger confusion, impaired coordination, even seizures. I abandoned our things and ran toward the clubhouse. Inside the clubhouse, a confrontation was already unfolding. Through the glass doors, I could see Emma standing before the soda machine, quarters in hand. Vivian Richardson stood between her and the machine, arms crossed, lips moving in what appeared to be stern reprimand. I pushed through the door in time to hear Emma's desperate explanation. "Please, Mrs. Richardson, I am having a diabetic emergency. My blood sugar is crashing. I just need one soda." Vivian stood unmoved, pointing dramatically to the "No Unsupervised Children" sign. "Rules exist for everyone, regardless of supposed emergencies. This area is restricted. You need to leave immediately and return with a parent." "My dad is coming," Emma pleaded, her voice taking on the slight slurring that signaled worsening hypoglycemia. "Please, I cannot wait. I need sugar now or I might pass out." "Dramatic performances will not exempt you from community guidelines," Vivian responded coldly. "Exit the clubhouse now, or I will be forced to take action." I was 15 seconds away, running across the lawn, when I saw Emma attempt to sidestep Vivian to reach the machine. Her movements were becoming uncoordinated as her blood sugar plummeted. My daughter was not being defiant. She was acting on survival instinct and medical necessity. What happened next occurred in horrifying slow motion. Vivian reached into her designer purse and pulled out a small black device, a personal taser. Without warning or further discussion, she discharged it against my 11-year-old daughter's back. The electrical current hit Emma's small frame. Her body went rigid before collapsing to the tile floor, limbs jerking uncontrollably. The quarters scattered across the floor as seizure activity overtook her. The combination of electrical shock and severe hypoglycemia had triggered exactly the medical emergency we had always feared. I burst through the doorway, my FBI training momentarily overwhelmed by parental terror. Emma lay convulsing on the ground, her lips taking on a bluish tint. The continuous glucose monitor alarm screamed from her arm, "Urgent low glucose, 42 mg/dl." Vivian stood over her, taser still in hand, addressing the small crowd of shocked onlookers who had followed the commotion. She refused to comply with facility rules. I was simply enforcing our no-tolerance policy for unauthorized access. Her voice carried no remorse, only administrative justification. My training finally overcame my shock. I dropped beside Emma, turning her onto her side to prevent choking as the seizure continued. "Call 911, I shouted to the stunned witnesses. "Tell them we have a diabetic child with hypoglycemic seizure." I pulled emergency glucose gel from my pocket, something I carried at all times, and squeezed it between Emma's cheek and gum where it could be absorbed even during a seizure. Her blood sugar was critically low now, the reading simply displaying low rather than a numerical value. Vivian continued her administrative defense, seemingly oblivious to the medical crisis unfolding. She was trespassing in a restricted area after multiple warnings. The association cannot be held liable for children who refuse to obey clearly posted regulations. A neighbor, Monica, from across the street, had brought the first aid kit from beside the pool. "Is there anything else we can do?" she asked, her voice shaking as she knelt beside us. "Monitor her breathing," I instructed, maintaining my focus on Emma's care rather than Vivian's continued justifications. "And keep everyone else back to give her space." The seizure gradually subsided as the glucose gel began taking effect, but Emma remained unconscious. Her breathing was shallow, her skin clammy. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as neighbors held open the clubhouse doors for the paramedics. As the emergency responders rushed in with their equipment, one asked what had happened. Before I could answer, Vivian stepped forward. This child was breaking clubhouse rules. When she refused to leave, I was forced to use reasonable measures to ensure compliance. I had no idea she had some medical condition. The paramedic gave her an incredulous look before turning his attention to Emma's treatment. They quickly established an IV line to administer dextrose solution while checking for injuries from both the fall and the taser. As they prepared to transport Emma to the ambulance, I finally stood and faced Vivian Richardson. Our eyes locked across the space between us. In that moment, I made a silent vow that would shape everything that followed. This woman had assaulted my child under the pretense of rule enforcement. She had no idea that she had just tasered the daughter of an FBI Civil Rights Division investigator, or what consequences that single action would unleash. The ambulance cut through suburban streets, sirens wailing. I sat beside the stretcher holding Emma's small hand while paramedics worked around us, monitoring her vital signs and glucose levels. The IV drip steadily delivered dextrose solution to raise her dangerously low blood sugar. She had regained consciousness but remained disoriented, her eyes unfocused as she whispered questions I could barely hear over the siren. "Dad, what happened? Why does everything hurt?" I leaned closer, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You had a bad low at the clubhouse, sweetheart. You are going to be okay. We are going to the hospital to make sure everything is fine." The paramedic across from me checked Emma's continuous glucose monitor. Blood sugar coming up, 72 and rising. He made a note on his tablet before examining the angry red marks where the taser barbs had struck her back. "These electrical burns will need treatment. Was she really tased for trying to get a soda during a diabetic emergency?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further about Vivian Richardson while focusing on Emma's care. Years of FBI training had taught me to compartmentalize emotion, to channel anger into methodical action rather than outbursts. That training was being tested like never before. At the hospital, the emergency department team transferred Emma to a treatment bay. The attending physician, Dr. Sharma, reviewed her charts with growing concern. The combination of severe hypoglycemia and electrical shock created a potentially dangerous situation, she explained. The body's stress response to being tased can further drop glucose levels in diabetic patients. We will admit her overnight for observation. While nurses settled Emma into a monitoring room, a police officer appeared at my side. Officer Davis introduced himself as the responding officer to the incident report called in from the clubhouse. "Several witnesses have provided statements already," he explained, flipping through his notepad. "But I need to get your account of what happened." I gave him a factual, dispassionate statement, careful to include only what I had directly witnessed. My investigator instincts remained intact even through parental rage. Creating a clean, unimpeachable record would be essential for what would come next. "Mrs. Richardson claims your daughter was trespassing and became combative when asked to leave," Officer Davis noted, watching my reaction carefully. "My 11-year-old diabetic daughter was having a medical emergency," I replied evenly. "Her blood glucose monitor confirms she was experiencing severe hypoglycemia, which requires immediate sugar intervention to prevent seizures or worse. The security camera in the clubhouse should have captured the entire interaction." The officer made a note about requesting the footage. "Mrs. Richardson states she was unaware of any medical condition and was simply enforcing facility rules." "Emma wears her medical alert bracelet at all times," I countered, pointing to the band still on my daughter's wrist. "And she verbally informed Mrs. Richardson of her emergency. Numerous witnesses heard her explanation before the taser was deployed." As the officer completed his report, My phone began buzzing with messages from neighbors. The community had erupted into factions. Some expressed horror and offers of support. "We saw everything. That woman is a monster. Let us know what we can do to help." "Emma is in our prayers. We will testify to what we saw. This has gone too far." Others, presumably Vivian's allies, sent different messages. "Rules exist for everyone's safety. If you had properly supervised your daughter, this would never have happened." The HOA president was just doing her job. No one is above the community guidelines. The division did not surprise me. In my years investigating discrimination cases, I had seen how communities often split when authority figures were challenged, no matter how egregious their actions. Throughout the evening, Emma's condition stabilized. The burn marks on her back had been treated and her glucose levels returned to normal range. As she finally drifted to sleep, medication easing her discomfort, I sat beside her bed planning my next steps. A text message from Monica, our elderly neighbor, caught my attention. "This is not the first time Vivian has gone too far. Many of us have stories but have been afraid to speak up. If you decide to fight this, you will not be alone." My professional training and parental instincts aligned into crystal clarity. This incident transcended a personal grievance. The tasing of my diabetic child represented something much larger, a pattern of discriminatory enforcement and abuse of power that had terrorized an entire community. Victims had remained silent out of fear, allowing the behavior to escalate until it reached this unconscionable level. Dr. Sharma entered with Emma's updated chart. "She is stable now, but I want to discuss something concerning." She seated herself across from me, speaking quietly. "The electrical shock from the taser affected her heart rhythm temporarily. While she has recovered, this could have been fatal given her medical condition. I am noting in my report that this constituted a potentially life-threatening assault on a child with a documented medical disability." I thanked her for her thoroughness, knowing such medical documentation would prove crucial. As she left, I pulled out my phone and made a call I had hoped would never be necessary in my personal life. "Robert, this is James Mitchell from Civil Rights Division. I need to activate an official investigation. The target is Vivian Richardson, president of Oak Ridge Estates HOA. The incident involves discriminatory enforcement resulting in the assault of a disabled minor, my daughter." As I ended the call, I looked at Emma sleeping peacefully, medical monitors beeping steadily beside her. My path forward was clear. This would not be handled merely as a father seeking justice for his child. This would become a full federal civil rights investigation into years of discrimination and abuse of power, conducted with all the resources and authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Emma returned home from the hospital the following afternoon, physically recovered but emotionally shaken. The burning sensation from the taser marks had subsided, but something in her eyes had changed, a wariness that no child should have to carry. She flinched at sudden movements and checked her continuous glucose monitor compulsively, afraid of another emergency. "What if my blood sugar drops at school?" she asked that evening, her voice small as I checked her monitor before bedtime. "What if no one believes me again?" I sat beside her on the bed, choosing my words carefully. "What happened was wrong, Emma. Mrs. Richardson made terrible choices that had nothing to do with you. We are going to make sure this never happens again, not to you, not to anyone." After she fell asleep, I transformed our dining room into an investigation headquarters. 15 years of federal case building had taught me that justice requires methodical documentation, irrefutable evidence, and strategic planning. While my parental instinct screamed for immediate confrontation, My professional training demanded something more effective, a comprehensive case that would address not just one incident, but an entire pattern of discriminatory behavior. The first step involved gathering official records. Using my federal credentials, I submitted formal requests for all HOA meeting minutes, violation notices, financial records, and complaint histories for the past 5 years. I contacted the county recorder's office for property records, tracking ownership changes that might reveal patterns in which homeowners had been effectively forced out. My laptop filled with spreadsheets documenting every violation. On notice issued under Vivian's presidency, categorized by homeowner demographics, violation type, and enforcement actions. Patterns quickly emerged from the raw data. Households with children, elderly residents, and minority families received disproportionately higher rates of citations and fines. Properties owned by Vivian's social circle, meanwhile, had violations mysteriously overlooked or penalties waived. Monica, my elderly neighbor, became an unexpected ally. "I have kept every citation she ever sent me," she explained, arriving with a file box of meticulously organized papers. 3 years of harassment because my late husband built a ramp for my wheelchair without getting proper approval first. Her hands trembled as she showed me photographs of the ramp being forcibly removed while she watched from her window. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. Under cover of evening walks or grocery store encounters, neighbors began sharing their stories. The Patels had been cited weekly for cooking odors until they finally moved away. The Johnsons, an interracial couple, found their children mysteriously excluded from community activities. Robert Diaz, a disabled veteran, received violations for his service dog despite federal protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, revealing a clear pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting protected classes, precisely the type of case that had defined my FBI career. What Vivian had done to Emma was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of unchecked abuses. I structured my investigation exactly as I would any official case, preparing documentation that would meet federal court standards. The Fair Housing Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and multiple civil rights statutes provided the legal framework. Emma's case, a child with a documented medical disability being denied reasonable accommodation and physically assaulted, represented the most severe violation, but it was far from the only one. During this phase, I maintained minimal contact with Vivian and her board allies. They had attempted to deliver a formal notice claiming Emma had violated Clubhouse policies, but I had simply accepted the document without comment, adding it to my growing evidence file. My silence clearly unnerved them. According to neighborhood sources, emergency board meetings had been called to discuss legal strategies and damage control. 3 weeks after the incident, my investigation reached critical mass. The evidence spoke for itself. Over 200 instances of potentially discriminatory enforcement, financial irregularities suggesting misappropriation of HOA funds, and multiple violations of federal housing protections. What had begun as a parent seeking justice for his child had evolved into a comprehensive federal case against systematic discrimination. Late one evening, as I compiled witness statements, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a nervous-looking man I recognized as Walter Green, the HOA board treasurer. He glanced anxiously over his shoulder before speaking. "She does not know I am here," he whispered. "But things have gone too far. Vivian has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. She plans to push through retroactive rule changes to justify her actions against your daughter and intimidate other homeowners from speaking out." He handed me a folder containing internal emails and meeting notes. "There are financial irregularities too. Association funds used for personal expenses. I cannot be part of this anymore." I thanked him for his courage, knowing how difficult it must have been to break ranks. His information provided the final pieces needed to complete my case. The emergency meeting Vivian had called would not proceed as she planned. Instead, it would become the venue for a long overdue public reckoning. That night, I finalized my presentation with methodical precision. Documents were organized, witness statements prepared, and visual aids created showing the statistical patterns of discrimination. I laid out my FBI credentials on the desk beside the case file, the revelation I had kept in reserve since moving to Oak Ridge Estates. As Emma slept peacefully down the hall, I made the final preparations for tomorrow's confrontation. Justice would not come through rage or retaliation, but through the systematic exposure of truth. Vivian Richardson had spent years weaponizing rules against the vulnerable. Tomorrow, she would learn what happens when actual law, designed to protect the rights of all citizens, was properly enforced. The community center filled to capacity 30 minutes before the emergency meeting was scheduled to begin. Residents claimed chairs, lined walls, and spilled into the adjacent hallway. The tension in the air was palpable. Neighbors who normally exchanged only pleasantries now sat divided in clear factions. Vivian's supporters clustered near the front, while those she had targeted occupied the back rows, whispering nervously among themselves. I arrived deliberately late, carrying a leather briefcase containing my evidence and a laptop for the presentation. Emma had asked to attend, showing remarkable courage, but I had decided against it. This confrontation would be intense, and she had already suffered enough trauma. Vivian stood at the podium, flanked by board members who avoided eye contact with the audience. She wore a crisp blue suit that radiated authority, her expression severe as she called the meeting to order. Only the slight tremor in her hand as she arranged her papers betrayed any anxiety about the community unrest following her actions. "This emergency session of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association will now come to order," she announced, her voice amplified through the microphone. "Our agenda tonight concerns the recent incident at the community clubhouse and the proposed amendments to our facility usage policies." She proceeded to deliver a carefully constructed narrative portraying herself as the victim of circumstances. "As your elected representative, I have always prioritized the safety and property values of our community. The unfortunate incident involving an unauthorized minor in the clubhouse was the result of unclear policies which we aim to correct tonight." Without naming Emma directly, she characterized her as an unsupervised child who refused lawful instructions from association leadership. She proposed amendments that would retroactively justify her actions: explicit authorization for physical removal of rule violators, immunity provisions for board members enforcing regulations, and stricter penalties for medical emergencies not pre-approved through proper channels. The absurdity of requiring pre-approval for medical emergencies would have been almost comical if the implications were not so dangerous. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably, even among her supporters. "Before we vote on these amendments," Vivian continued, "we will take limited comments from residents. Please keep your remarks to 30 seconds and remember that personal attacks will not be tolerated." A few of her allies spoke first, offering rehearsed statements about rule compliance and community standards. Then came the critics, parents concerned about the precedent of using physical force against children, elderly residents afraid of being targeted for minor infractions. When Monica attempted to share her experience with accessibility discrimination, Vivian cut her microphone after precisely 30 seconds. though she had allowed her supporters to speak well beyond the time limit. "If there are no further comments," Vivian said, clearly eager to proceed to the vote where her board allies would rubber stamp her proposals, "we will move to—" "I would like to speak," I said, rising from my seat. My voice carried through the room without a microphone, a skill developed through years of courtroom testimony. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, you are not on the speaker's list. As the parent involved in the incident under discussion, your participation represents a conflict of interest." "Actually," I replied, moving toward the front of the room, "my comments do not concern just my daughter. They address a pattern of discriminatory enforcement affecting multiple residents over several years." "That is not on tonight's agenda," she countered, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the podium. "Federal civil rights violations supersede HOA meeting agendas, Mrs. Richardson." I reached the front of the room and placed my briefcase on the table beside the podium. With deliberate slowness, I removed my FBI credentials and badge, placing them on the wooden surface where everyone in the front rows could see them clearly. "For those who do not know me yet, I am Special Agent James Mitchell, Civil Rights Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation." I opened my credentials so the federal seal was visible. "While I moved here as a private citizen and father, recent events have necessitated my professional involvement." The room fell completely silent. Vivian's face drained of color as she stared at my badge. Board members exchanged panicked glances. "Mrs. Richardson, 3 weeks ago you used a taser on my 11-year-old daughter, who wears a clearly visible medical alert bracelet, when she attempted to access emergency sugar during a documented hypoglycemic event. That alone constitutes assault on a disabled minor, a federal civil rights violation given your position of authority." I connected my laptop to the projector, and the screen behind Vivian filled with a statistical analysis of HOA violations under her presidency. But this incident was not isolated. It represents the culmination of a systematic pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting protected classes of residents. Charts appeared showing disproportionate enforcement against families with children, elderly residents, minorities, and disabled homeowners. These actions constitute violations of the Fair Housing Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and multiple civil rights statutes. Vivian attempted to interject. "These allegations are completely—" "My investigation includes sworn statements from 27 current and former residents," I continued steadily. "It includes documentation of financial irregularities involving HOA funds diverted to personal use." Another slide appeared showing suspicious transactions highlighted in red, and it includes evidence that board members were coerced into rubber-stamping discriminatory policies under threat of targeted enforcement against their own properties. The board members physically distanced themselves from Vivian, sliding their chairs away as the evidence mounted. Her most loyal supporters stared at the floor, unwilling to meet the eyes of neighbors they had watched being targeted. Effective immediately, the FBI Civil Rights Division is launching a formal investigation into these practices. Mrs. Richardson, you should expect to hear from federal prosecutors regarding criminal charges for assault on a disabled minor and civil rights violations. What happened next demonstrated how quickly power can collapse. As if a dam had broken, residents began standing to share their stories. The elderly man whose requests for a wheelchair ramp were repeatedly denied, the Hispanic family whose children were banned from the pool based on noise complaints, the single mother whose request for a security light was rejected, while her neighbor's identical request was approved. Vivian attempted repeatedly to regain control of the meeting, but her authority had evaporated. When she tried to adjourn the session, the vice president of the board moved to block her, calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. The meeting that Vivian had called to consolidate her power instead became the vehicle for her removal. By the end of the evening, the board had voted unanimously to suspend her pending the investigation. As residents filed out, many approached me with handshakes, tears, and thanks for finally confronting the reign of terror that had controlled their neighborhood for years. Vivian remained at the podium long after most had left, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. When she finally gathered her belongings, her posture was no longer rigid with authority but slumped in defeat. As she passed me near the door, she attempted one final defense. "I was just enforcing the rules," she said, her voice barely audible. "Without rules, there is chaos." I looked directly into her eyes. "Rules exist to protect people, Mrs. Richardson. When they become weapons to harm the vulnerable, they are no longer rules. They are abuse, and abuse always eventually meets justice." As she walked alone to her car under the harsh parking lot lights, the community she had ruled through fear began its first night of freedom. The transformation had begun, not through matching her tactics of intimidation, but through the systematic application of actual justice. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply ensuring that the law works as it was designed to work, protecting the vulnerable from those who would abuse their power. The weeks following the confrontation brought sweeping changes to Oak Ridge Estates. Federal investigators arrived within days, interviewing residents and collecting additional evidence. Their unmarked vehicles became a common sight in the neighborhood as they built their case methodically. For many residents who had suffered silently under Vivian's regime, giving their official statements provided long-delayed catharsis. The interim HOA board, led by Monica and other longtime residents, began dismantling the most restrictive and arbitrary rules immediately. Community meetings transformed from exercises in intimidation to actual collaborative sessions where concerns were addressed respectfully. For the first time in years, neighbors spoke freely without fear of retaliation. Emma's recovery progressed steadily. The physical marks from the taser faded faster than the emotional impact of the assault. We arranged sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, and gradually, my daughter regained her confidence. The incident had changed her, but not broken her spirit. She became an advocate for medical awareness, working with her school to implement better emergency protocols for all students with chronic conditions. 3 months after the incident, I received the call I had been waiting for. Criminal charges had been filed against Vivian Richardson, assault on a disabled minor, civil rights violations under color of authority, and financial fraud related to HOA funds. The detective informed me that she had surrendered that morning at the county courthouse, walking past local news cameras with her attorney. The image of her booking photo appeared on local news websites, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, designer clothes replaced by standard issue attire, expression no longer commanding but defeated. The civil case expanded beyond Vivian to include the entire former board for enabling discriminatory practices. Most settled quickly, agreeing to financial penalties and community service. Only Vivian insisted on fighting the charges, unable to acknowledge that enforcing rules did not grant immunity for discrimination or assault. At the first full community meeting after the charges were announced, the interim board unveiled proposals for fundamental HOA reforms. Medical emergency exemptions were codified into the bylaws. All residents with chronic conditions could register for special accommodations. The clubhouse now maintained a fully stocked emergency kit with juice boxes, glucose tablets, and basic medical supplies. Most significantly, the community established a new inclusion committee charged with reviewing all rules and enforcement actions for potential discriminatory impact. Emma was invited to serve as the youth representative, proudly accepting the role as her contribution to preventing similar incidents. On a crisp autumn afternoon 6 months after the tasing incident, I stood in my backyard watching Emma play with neighborhood friends. A small garden memorial had been planted near the clubhouse. Residents called it the Justice Garden, with flowers representing diversity and a small plaque committing the community to equal treatment for all residents. My FBI colleagues had used our case as a training example for recognizing housing discrimination that hides behind seemingly neutral rules and regulations. The Oak Ridge case would help other agents identify similar patterns in communities across the country. The criminal proceedings against Vivian concluded with a plea agreement. She would serve probation, pay substantial restitution, and never again hold any position of authority in housing management. More meaningful than her legal punishment was the complete rejection of her values by the community she had once controlled. Her house stood empty with a "for sale" sign that had remained in place for months, a silent reminder of how quickly power built on fear can dissolve. Emma and I visited the clubhouse on the anniversary of the incident. The soda machine still stood in the same spot, but now beside it hung a clear emergency protocol poster and a dedicated phone for medical assistance. Children wearing medical alert bracelets had been given special key cards ensuring access to all facilities when needed. "Do you think she ever understood what she did wrong?" Emma asked as we walked home through streets that now felt truly welcoming. I considered the question carefully. Some people view rules as more important than the people those rules should protect. They forget that the purpose of any regulation should be to make life better, not to control others. Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I am glad we changed things, not just for me but for everyone." That evening, as neighborhood children played freely on lawns that once would have triggered violation notices, I reflected on how communities heal. The reign of terror had ended not through matching intimidation with intimidation, but through the patient application of justice. The system that I had dedicated my career to upholding had worked exactly as intended, protecting the vulnerable and holding the powerful accountable. Sometimes standing firm against abuse of power requires nothing more complicated than illuminating truth and enforcing laws designed to protect basic human dignity. In our case, justice itself had been the most satisfying revenge of all.